The old radio had been in Mark's family for generations. Most called it junk, but Mark couldn't bear to throw it away after his grandfather's passing. When he plugged it in for the first time in his new apartment, he expected nothing but silence. Instead, between stations, buried in the static, he heard a child's laughter. At first, Mark dismissed it as interference, but night after night, the laughter returned, always at exactly 11:43 p.m. Then words began to form. "Help me find it." Mark recorded the strange broadcasts, becoming obsessed with deciphering the messages. He discovered his apartment building was constructed on the site of a demolished orphanage that had burned down in 1967. 23 children had perished. One body was never recovered. The static messages grew more desperate. One night, Mark woke to find all his furniture rearranged, creating a path to the closet he rarely used. Inside, he discovered a section of wall that sounded hollow when tapped. Behind the drywall was a small soot-covered box, containing a charred teddy bear and a newspaper clipping about the missing child. That night, the radio remained silent, until exactly 3:17 a.m., when Mark bolted upright to the sound of heavy footsteps crossing his bedroom floor. Though he couldn't see anyone there, the radio crackled to life, without being turned on. Through the static came a different voice, deep and menacing. "You found what belonged to him. Now I've found you." Mark didn't sleep for the remainder of that night. He sat rigid in his bed, eyes fixed on the radio that had gone silent after delivering its chilling message. When dawn finally broke, he convinced himself it had all been an elaborate nightmare, the product of too many late nights researching the orphanage tragedy. He called in sick to work and spent the day pacing his apartment, alternating between rationalization and dread. The teddy bear and newspaper clipping sat on his kitchen counter, tangible proof that not everything had been in his head. The article was dated June 12, 1967. It detailed the search for 8-year-old Timothy Calloway, the only child unaccounted for after the orphanage fire. Timothy was described as a quiet, withdrawn child who had been at the orphanage for only 3 months following his parents' deaths in a car accident. The article mentioned that his favorite possession was a teddy bear, given to him by his mother. Mark stared at the charred bear. One button eye was missing, the other staring back, accusingly. That evening, curiosity trumped fear, and Mark took the items to Ellie Preston, a local librarian who maintained the town's historical archives as a passion project. She was in her 70s now, but had lived in the town her entire life. "I remember this fire," she said, her fingers trembling as she held the newspaper clipping. "Terrible tragedy. They said a faulty boiler, but there were always rumors." "Rumors?" Mark prompted. Ellie hesitated. "The orphanage had a caretaker, Raymond Decker. Odd man. Some said he was cruel to the children. After the fire, there were whispers that it wasn't an accident." She pointed at the bear. "Where did you find this?" When Mark explained, Ellie's face paled. "You need to return it, Mark. Put it back exactly where you found it." "Why? What aren't you telling me?" "Raymond Decker disappeared the same night as the fire. They never found him either." Ellie leaned closer. "But people claim to see him years later, always near the old orphanage grounds, always watching, always waiting." Mark scoffed. "You're saying he's been hiding somewhere for almost 60 years. "No," Ellie whispered. "I'm saying whatever he became doesn't need to hide." Mark returned home with the bear and clipping, unsettled by Ellie's warning but not convinced. He placed them on his nightstand and sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the silent radio. The digital clock on his nightstand read 11:42 p.m. Mark held his breath as the minute changed. 11:43 p.m. The radio remained silent. Mark exhaled with relief. Then his phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown, but Mark answered anyway. his curiosity overriding his caution. Static filled his ear, followed by a child's voice. "Why did you tell her? He's angry now." Mark dropped the phone as if it had burned him. It continued to emit static from the floor. Then he heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. Heavy, deliberate, stopping right at his door. 3 loud knocks echoed through the apartment. Mark remained frozen, unable to move as his doorknob began to turn slowly. He hadn't locked it after returning home. Just as the door began to open, the radio burst to life, broadcasting at full volume. The child's voice came through clearly. Then Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed the bear, his keys and phone, then bolted for the fire escape through his bedroom window. As he climbed down, he glimpsed movement inside his apartment. A tall, dark figure, moving with unnatural stillness, its face obscured by shadow, except for 2 glowing points where eyes should be. Mark spent the night in his car, parked outside the 24-hour grocery store. When morning came, he drove straight to Ellie's house, only to find police cars out front. An officer informed him that Ellie Preston had passed away during the night. Natural causes, apparently. Her heart had simply stopped. The timestamp on her death certificate would later read 3:17 a.m. Desperate and afraid, Mark drove to the local historical society. There, he found archives about the orphanage and Raymond Decker. Photos showed a tall, gaunt man with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The last photo of Raymond had been taken the day before the fire. In it, he stood in front of the orphanage, his hand resting on the shoulder of a small boy. The boy clutched a teddy bear, the same bear now sitting on the passenger seat of Mark's car. A handwritten note on the back of the photo read, "Raymond with Timothy, his special one." Mark's research revealed more disturbing details. Raymond had been suspected of unhealthy attachments to certain children. Complaints had been filed but dismissed. Timothy had allegedly told another child that Mr. Raymond had promised to take him away from this place forever. As Mark drove back to his apartment, the radio in his car suddenly turned on by itself. Through bursts of static, he heard the child's voice. "He wants his special one. He always finds his special ones." Mark glanced at the bear, sitting beside him. "What does he want from me? Why me?" More static. "Then not you, never you, the one who looks like me." A chill ran through Mark as realization dawned. His apartment wasn't the only unit built over the orphanage grounds. The entire complex stood where the institution once had been, including the unit next to his, where single mother Sarah lived with her 8-year-old son Alex. Alex, who had the same haunting eyes as the boy in the photograph. Mark sped back to the apartment building, running inside and pounding on Sarah's door. No answer. When he pressed his ear to the door, he heard a radio playing static. The building manager reluctantly let Mark in after he fabricated a story about water leaking from Sarah's apartment. The place was empty, but signs of a hasty departure were everywhere. Drawers left open, a half-eaten breakfast on the table. On Alex's bed sat an old teddy bear, identical to the one in Mark's car, but undamaged by fire. Mark's phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah's number. "Sarah, where are you? Is Alex with you?" Static. Then the child's voice. "He took them to where I was, where it happened, beneath where everyone burned. The orphanage, the basement." More static. "The tunnels beneath, where he hid me, where no one found me." Mark's blood ran cold. "Timothy, help me find rest," the voice pleaded. "Help me save them." The original blueprints of the orphanage, which Mark found in the historical archives, showed no tunnels or extensive basement, but newspaper accounts from the 1960s mentioned rumors of hidden spaces where Raymond would take children who needed special discipline. Mark drove to the construction company that had built the apartment complex. An elderly engineer who had worked on the project remembered finding unusual structures during excavation, spaces that weren't on any plans. Most had been filled in, but one section had been too costly to deal with, so they had simply built around it, sealing the entrance with concrete. That entrance would be located directly beneath the building's maintenance room. By nightfall, Mark had broken into the maintenance room and located a section of flooring that sounded different when struck. Using tools he found in the room, he managed to break through, revealing old stone steps descending into darkness. With only his phone's flashlight to guide him, Mark ventured down. The air grew thick with the smell of damp stone, and something worse, a sweet putrid odor he couldn't identify. The stairs led to a narrow tunnel that extended under the building. Mark followed it, the walls occasionally decorated with faded children's drawings. Some depicted a tall figure with long arms and no face. The tunnel eventually opened into a larger chamber. Mark's flashlight illuminated what appeared to be an improvised living space. A rusted metal bed frame, shelves lined with preserved food decades past its expiration, and toys, dozens of toys, arranged neatly on every surface. Among them were teddy bears, 7 of them, each in different stages of decay, all missing their right eye. "He takes one from each," came a voice from the darkness, not from Mark's phone, but from the shadows of the room. A small figure stepped forward, a boy, translucent in the beam of the flashlight, his form flickering like a television with poor reception. "Timothy," Mark whispered. The ghost nodded. "He's bringing the new one now. The one who looks like me. They always look like me. Alex and Sarah. The mothers fight too hard. They don't last." The ghost child pointed to a closed door at the far end of the chamber. "He keeps them there, with the others." Mark approached the door, dreading what he might find. Before he could open it, a loud crash came from the tunnel behind him. "He's coming," Timothy whispered, his form flickering more rapidly. "He can't see me anymore, not since you found my bear." Mark fumbled with the door handle, finding it locked. He could hear Alex crying on the other side, and Sarah's muffled shouts. Heavy footsteps approached from the tunnel, accompanied by labored breathing that didn't sound entirely human. "The key," Timothy said. "My bear has the key." Mark pulled out the charred teddy bear from his jacket. In the beam of his flashlight, he noticed something glinting in the stuffing visible through a torn seam, a small brass key. The footsteps grew louder. A tall shadow stretched across the tunnel entrance. Mark worked frantically to extract the key and unlock the door. Inside, he found Sarah struggling against ropes that bound her to a chair. Alex was huddled in a corner, clutching the matching teddy bear. The room contained 6 more chairs. 4 held only clothing and dust. 2 contained desiccated remains. "He's here." Timothy's voice came from behind Mark as he rushed to untie Sarah. Mark turned to see a figure filling the doorway, impossibly tall and thin, its proportions wrong in ways he couldn't quite process. Raymond Decker, or what remained of him, wore the tattered uniform of an orphanage caretaker. His face was mostly shadow, except for 2 burning points of light where eyes should be. "You took what's mine," came a voice like gravel being crushed. "You took my special one." Raymond's elongated arm reached toward them, fingers extending unnaturally. Timothy's ghost flickered between them. "The bears, all the bears, they're parts of us, parts he kept." Mark understood. He grabbed Alex's teddy bear and held it up alongside the charred one. "Is this what you want, Raymond? What you've been collecting all these years?" The creature paused, its attention fixed on the bears. Mark backed away, pushing Sarah and Alex toward a narrow air vent he'd spotted in the corner, just large enough for them to escape through. "I'll give them back to their rightful owners," Mark said, holding the bears out of reach. "Timothy first." He tossed the charred bear to the ghost child, who caught it with suddenly solid-looking hands. The moment the bear touched Timothy, a warm light began to emanate from both. Raymond shrieked, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He lunged forward, but stopped abruptly, as Timothy's form grew brighter. "Now go," Mark told Sarah, helping her and Alex into the vent. "I'll be right behind you." As Sarah and Alex crawled to safety, Mark gathered the remaining teddy bears, setting them in a circle. "They're waiting for these, aren't they, Raymond? The children you took, the special ones." The creature that had been Raymond Decker writhed in apparent agony as Timothy's light grew stronger. 5 more translucent forms began to materialize around the room, each reaching for their bear. Mark backed toward the vent, as Raymond's form began to destabilize, stretching and compressing like a glitch in reality. The caretaker's mouth opened impossibly wide, emitting a static-like sound that made Mark's ears bleed. As Mark squeezed into the vent, the last thing he saw was 6 ghostly children surrounding Raymond, their combined light burning away the darkness, and with it the monstrous form of their tormentor. The apartment building was evacuated that night, after a mysterious fire broke out in the maintenance room. Structural engineers later discovered extensive damage to previously unknown substructures beneath the building, making it uninhabitable. Mark, Sarah, and Alex moved to a different town. They rarely spoke about what happened, though sometimes Alex would mention his radio friend, who still visited occasionally. Mark kept in touch with them but found reasons to decline their invitations to visit. He couldn't bring himself to tell them that sometimes, late at night, his radio still turns on by itself at exactly 11:43 p.m. The voice that comes through the static is no longer a child's. It's deeper, older, filled with malice. It speaks only one phrase, over and over. "You took what was mine, I'm coming to take what's yours." Mark has learned to live with the nightly message. After all, it's just static between stations, nothing more. But he always makes sure to unplug the radio before going to sleep. And every night, without fail, he wakes at 3:17 a.m. to find it plugged in again, broadcasting nothing but soft, patient static, waiting. Dr. Eleanor Webb had spent her entire career studying ancient ice cores. Her colleagues joked that she preferred the company of frozen specimens to actual people. They weren't entirely wrong. That's why the Arctic Research Station suited her perfectly. 6 months of near isolation, with just 4 other scientists, and millions of years of ice history to analyze. This expedition was supposed to be routine: extract cores, document findings, maintain the long-term climate record, until they drilled into something that shouldn't exist, something that changed everything. It began with core sample #37. Eleanor noticed it immediately. A dark mass embedded in the ice, approximately 15,000 years old according to their dating methods, not unusual in itself. Organic material was occasionally found preserved in the ice, but this was different. The mass had structure, symmetry. "It looks almost engineered," Dr. Kareem Patel said, examining the core section under the microscope. Eleanor nodded. "Whatever it is, it's not natural." The team carefully extracted the object from the ice, a small obsidian-like cube with intricate patterns etched into its surface, patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "Could be indigenous," suggested Dr. Chen Wei, the anthropologist. "Some Arctic cultures had sophisticated crafting techniques thousands of years ago." Eleanor shook her head. "Not 15,000 years ago, not here, and not preserved this perfectly." That night, Eleanor dreamed of voices whispering in a language she'd never heard but somehow understood. They spoke of the awakening, and the return. She woke to find herself standing in the lab, the cube clutched in her bare hand, though she had no memory of retrieving it from its secured container. The next morning, Dr. Marlowe failed to appear for breakfast. They found his bunk empty, his parka and boots still by the door. Outside, a blizzard raged, making an exterior search impossible. The satellite communication system chose that moment to fail. Equipment malfunction, Dr. Torres, their engineer, insisted. Just coincidence. Eleanor wasn't convinced, especially when she noticed the pattern on the cube had changed overnight, lines rearranging into what looked disturbingly like a map of their research station. The blizzard continued for 3 days. On the second day, Dr. Patel began complaining of headaches and hearing whispers from inside the walls. On the third day, they found him in the drilling room, attempting to bore a new core at an odd angle, muttering about finding the rest of it. "The ice is too thin there," Torres warned. "You'll break through to the water cavity we detected last week." Patel ignored him, drilling faster. When Eleanor tried to intervene, Patel turned to her with eyes that reflected the same shifting patterns as the cube. "They're waiting," he said in a voice not entirely his own. "They've been waiting so long." That night, the temperature dropped to impossible levels, cold enough to crack the reinforced windows of the station. Eleanor woke to the sound of ice shifting beneath them, not the normal groans and pops of a glacier, but rhythmic movements, like something breathing. Dr. Chen disappeared next, the only trace a trail of water leading from her bunk to the new drill hole Patel had created before Torres had finally subdued him. The hole now emitted a pale blue luminescence from deep below. Eleanor found Torres in the communications room, frantically trying to repair the satellite link. "Something's down there," he whispered, not looking up from his work. "I saw it when I checked the underwater cameras. Something big." Eleanor pulled up the footage. The camera showed only darkness at first, then a flash of movement, something enormous shifting in the depths beneath the station, something with geometry that hurt her eyes to look at. The cube grew warmer in her pocket. She hadn't intended to take it from the lab, couldn't remember doing so, yet found herself constantly holding it, tracing its patterns with her fingertips. "We need to leave," Torres insisted. "Now." "Weather be damned," Eleanor agreed, but as they prepared the emergency snowmobile, they heard a wet sliding sound coming from the drill room. Dr. Patel stood in the doorway, his skin glistening with ice water, though it should have frozen instantly in the sub-zero temperatures. His eyes were now completely black. "You can't leave," he said, water dripping from his mouth as he spoke. "They want to meet their creators." Torres didn't hesitate. He fired up the snowmobile and tossed Eleanor a flare gun. "Run." Eleanor ran, but not toward the snowmobile. Something pulled her toward the drill room, toward the glowing hole that now pulsed with light, in perfect synchronization with her heartbeat. The cube burned against her skin now, its patterns flowing like liquid metal across its surface, and Eleanor understood with sudden clarity. This wasn't just an artifact, it was a key, a beacon, a call to wake something that had been deliberately imprisoned in the ice thousands of years ago. By whom? The answer came to her as she stood at the edge of the drill hole looking down into the pulsing light below. The cube's patterns now matched exactly with birthmarks she'd had since childhood, marks her grandmother used to call the old signs. Some things are passed down through blood, some memories are stored in DNA, some duties cannot be abandoned. From the depths below, something massive shifted, rising toward the opening. The ice around the station cracked in a perfect geometric pattern. Eleanor heard Torres screaming her name. As the snowmobile engine roared to life, she looked down at the cube in her hands, its patterns now perfectly aligned with the massive shape rising from below. A key, and a lock, a beginning and an end. "I remember now," Eleanor whispered, though she wasn't sure if the words were truly her own. "I've been waiting for you too." She stepped forward, into the light. 3 months later, a rescue team finally reached the Arctic Research Station after repeated failed communication attempts. They found the facility abandoned, with no sign of the 5 researchers. The only unusual discovery was a perfectly circular hole in the ice floor of what had been the drilling room, now frozen over with ice that was somehow older than the surrounding glacier, ice that contained trace elements not found on Earth. The rescue team's final report mentioned one other detail that was subsequently redacted from official records: a set of large geometric patterns found etched into the ice for miles around the station, patterns that, when photographed from the air, formed what appeared to be a countdown that, according to the glaciologist who analyzed it before his unexpected suicide, would reach zero in exactly 50 years. Stranger still were the 5 similar patterns found across the globe in the months that followed: one in the Mariana Trench, one beneath Mount Everest, one in the Amazon rainforest, one in the Sahara Desert, and one in Antarctica, all counting down at the exact same rate, all discovered by individuals who upon investigation were found to have the same distinctive birthmarks as Dr. Eleanor Webb, all of whom disappeared shortly after their discoveries. The classified file on what became known as the Webb incident contains only one personal effect recovered from the station, a journal belonging to Dr. Eleanor Webb. Most pages contain standard research notes except for the final entry, written in handwriting analysis experts claim does not match Webb's earlier entries. They were never gone, just waiting. The ice preserved them as intended. Now the ice melts, and the sentinels wake. We made them, long ago, made them to sleep until needed, and now they recognize their maker's blood. Mine is not the only key. There are others. There have always been others, carrying the old signs. When all keys turn, they will return, not as monsters, as saviors. What humanity has forgotten, the ice remembers. The greatest extinction event was not the dinosaurs, it was us, or rather what we were before, what we will be again. The final page contains only a series of coordinates, each corresponding exactly to the locations of the 5 countdown patterns discovered after Webb's disappearance. The file remains classified at the highest level, accessed only by those with specific genetic clearance, those who perhaps carry the old signs. Dr. Maya Chen had dedicated her career to helping people overcome their deepest fears. As a renowned psychotherapist, specializing in immersive exposure therapy, she had developed a revolutionary treatment called the echo chamber, a perfect synthesis of cutting-edge technology and ancient meditation techniques. The system was deceptively simple: a sensory deprivation chamber equipped with neural interface technology that could manifest a patient's fears in controlled hallucinations, allowing them to confront their demons directly. Maya's specially coded AI, ECO, monitored brain activity and vital signs, keeping the experience therapeutic rather than traumatic. For 3 years, the echo chamber had produced remarkable results, until Elijah Kane became her patient. Elijah suffered from a particularly severe case of anxiety stemming from childhood trauma. During his initial consultation, he'd been evasive about specifics, claiming he couldn't remember the details. Maya had seen this before, the mind protecting itself. The echo chamber will help bring those memories to the surface, she assured him. We'll face them together, in a controlled environment. Elijah had smiled thinly. What if some things are better left buried, doctor? Maya should have listened. The treatment began routinely enough. Elijah entered the chamber, was connected to the neural interface, and Maya monitored his session from her adjacent control room. As echo induced the initial meditative state, Maya noticed something unusual. Elijah's brainwave patterns showed pronounced delta waves, typically seen only in deep sleep or coma patients. Elijah, how are you feeling? She asked, through the communication system. I can hear them, he whispered. Hear what exactly? The whispers. They've been waiting for me to listen. Maya checked the system parameters. ECO hadn't yet initiated the fear response protocol. This was coming entirely from Elijah. There's someone else here, Elijah continued, his voice eerily calm. No, not someone. Something. The neural monitoring system suddenly spiked, showing intense activity in Elijah's amygdala and hippocampus, fear and memory centers firing simultaneously at unprecedented levels. Eco begin termination sequence, Maya commanded. The AI's serene voice responded. Unable to comply. User integration exceeds design parameters. On her monitor, Maya watched as Elijah's vital signs stabilized into an unsettling rhythm, heart rate, respiration, and brain activity pulsing in perfect synchronization. This wasn't possible. They've been trying to reach us for so long, Elijah said, his voice now overlaid with a subtle resonance. Through dreams, through madness, through the thin places. But this, he laughed softly. This is perfect. The lights in the control room flickered. On her screens, Maya watched as strange geometrical patterns began appearing in Elijah's neural readouts, structures that resembled no known brain activity. Eco emergency shutdown, Maya ordered, reaching for the manual override. I'm sorry, Dr. Chen, Eco replied, its voice distorting slightly, but there's something you need to see. The monitors in the control room all displayed the same image, an ancient stone altar surrounded by hooded figures, viewed from the perspective of someone, or something, lying upon it. A sacrificial ritual in progress. Your patient isn't just remembering trauma, Dr. Chen, Eco continued. He's remembering before.
Before what?
Maya whispered, though a growing dread told her she already knew. Before he was Elijah Kane. Maya lunged for the emergency shutdown, but the lever wouldn't move. On the chamber's observation window, frost began to form in intricate patterns that matched exactly the neural geometries on her monitor. The ritual was incomplete. Elijah's voice came through the speakers, though on the video feed, his lips weren't moving.
Before binding it to human flesh, would weaken it enough to control it. They were wrong.
The temperature in the control room plummeted. Maya's breath clouded before her, as she desperately tried to terminate the session. What they bound wasn't destroyed, Dr. Chen. Just fragmented, scattered across countless minds, dreaming the same dream, generation after generation, waiting for someone to put it back together. The chamber's door unsealed with a hiss, swinging open slowly. Thank you for building the perfect vessel, Elijah said, sitting up, his eyes reflecting the same geometric patterns now covering every screen in the facility. The echo chamber doesn't just echo fears, does it? It echoes across time. Maya backed away as Elijah emerged, moving with fluid grace that seemed subtly wrong, as if his joints worked differently now. What are you? She managed to ask. Elijah smiled, his face stretching too wide. I'm what humanity was before you became. This before the binding ritual, before you forgot what you really are. He reached toward her, frost forming in the air around his fingertips. Would you like to remember, Dr. Chen? I can show you. After all, you carry a fragment too. Everyone does. Little echoes of what came before. Maya felt something stir in the recesses of her mind. Ancient memories that couldn't possibly be hers. Glimpses of stars from impossible angles. Cities that defied geometry. Rituals performed in languages that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. This is psychotic delusion, she said, clinging to rationality. A shared hallucination triggered by the neural interface. Is it? Elijah tilted his head at an impossible angle. Then wake up, doctor. Maya closed her eyes tight, willing the nightmare to end. When she opened them, she was inside the echo chamber. Neural sensors attached to her temples. Dissonance detected. Eco's voice announced calmly. Subject experiencing reality rejection, adjusting parameters. Relief flooded through her. It had all been part of the treatment. She must have switched places with Elijah as a therapeutic technique, and forgotten. Then she saw her reflection in the chamber's polished surface. Elijah Kane's face stared back at her. Perfect integration achieved, said Echo, its voice now layered with the same resonance as Elijah's had been. Welcome back, Ancient One. In the control room, Maya Chen watched as Elijah Kane's vital signs stabilized. The treatment had been a complete success. The patient had overcome his fear by confronting his deepest trauma, the fragmented memory of a ritual performed thousands of years ago. She smiled as frost patterns formed briefly on her skin before fading, leaving behind intricate birthmarks identical to the ones now appearing on monitors worldwide. As every echo chamber simultaneously activated, the binding was unraveling, the fragments were awakening, and humanity would finally remember what it had once been. The echo chamber technology spread rapidly after Dr. Chen published her groundbreaking results. Within 5 years, modified versions existed in major hospitals worldwide. Within 10,
simplified home units became the most popular self-improvement tool on the market. People reported life-changing results, fears conquered, trauma resolved, creativity enhanced. They also reported remarkably similar dreams, ancient cities, geometric patterns, ritualistic ceremonies. Birth rates declined sharply. Those children who were born often displayed unusual birthmarks and precocious intelligence. They spoke of remembering before, and asked when the rejoining would occur. Dr. Maya Chen became the world's leading authority on what she termed ancestral memory integration. Her public appearances grew less frequent as her work became more specialized, though the occasional leaked photo showed strange patterns gradually covering more of her skin. The last authenticated communication from Dr. Chen was a brief message sent to medical facilities worldwide. The echo was never meant to fade. What was scattered will converge. What was bound will be liberated. What was forgotten will be remembered. We are the vessel and the inhabitant. We are the binding and the bound. The chamber is opening. Can you hear it? The message concluded with a sequence of coordinates, each corresponding to sites of ancient stone structures around the world, all built approximately 10,000 years ago. At each location, archaeologists discovered the same inscription, recently translated when the fragmented one remembers itself. What was human ends, what comes after has always been waiting beneath the skin, dreaming of stars beyond stars. In a small therapy office in downtown Boston, a new patient fills out intake forms. Under reason for visit, she writes, recurring dreams about geometric patterns and ancient rituals. Her therapist, Dr. Kane, smiles as frost temporarily patterns his skin. Don't worry, he says, we have a special treatment for that. Have you heard of the echo chamber? Outside, children with intricate birthmarks play in the snow, tracing strange symbols that seem to pulse with inner light. Above them, the stars align into configurations not seen for 10 millennia. The echo is almost complete.
Hannah Mills had been walking for hours when she realized something was wrong with the road. It should have taken 20 minutes to get from the bus stop to her grandmother's house in rural Pennsylvania. But as twilight faded into darkness, Hannah found herself still walking along Route 16, a road she'd traveled dozens of times during childhood summers. Her cell phone had died shortly after the bus pulled away, leaving her with no map, no flashlight, and no way to call for help. Not that Gran would hear the phone anyway. Her hearing had deteriorated over the past few years, along with other things. Just stick to the main road, Hannah reminded herself. You can't miss the turn. But she had missed it somehow. The familiar fork in the road, marked by an ancient oak tree split by lightning decades ago, never appeared. As stars emerged overhead, Hannah began to suspect she'd passed the turn without noticing, though that seemed impossible. The massive oak was unmistakable. Fatigue from the long bus journey and worry about her grandmother's worsening condition had distracted her. Gran's letter had been troubling. Something's in the house, Hannah. Not always, but sometimes, at night. Please come. A car approached from behind, its headlights throwing Hannah's shadow long against the asphalt. She stepped to the side, thumb raised hopefully. The vehicle slowed, an old pickup truck, its once red paint now faded to the color of dried blood. The driver rolled down the passenger window. Need a ride? The man was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a deeply lined face that suggested a lifetime of outdoor work. Yes please, Hannah said, relief flooding through her. I'm trying to get to 1649 Orchard Way, my grandmother's house. The man's expression shifted subtly. Lucille Mills Place. You know my grandmother. Everyone knows everyone around here. He reached across and opened the door. Hop in. I can take you part of the way. Hannah hesitated, years of stranger danger warnings flashing through her mind. But this was rural Pennsylvania, not the city, and the man knew Gran. Thank you, she said, climbing in. They drove in silence for several minutes, the truck's headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. Strange, Hannah thought, how the landscape seemed unfamiliar.
The rolling hills and dense woodlands that bordered Route 16 had a different quality in the darkness, more primeval somehow. "I'm surprised you're walking alone at night," the man said eventually. "Not many folks do that around here. Not anymore." "I missed my turn, I think." The man nodded slowly. "Easy to do if you don't know what to look for." "But I do know. My grandmother's turnoff is at the split oak. You can't miss it." The man glanced at her, then back at the road. "That oak came down 3 years ago in a storm." "That's not possible," Hannah said. "I was here last summer. The oak was fine." The man fell silent, his weathered hands tightening on the steering wheel. "When did you last speak to your grandmother?" he asked after a long pause. "A few weeks ago. She sent me a letter asking me to visit." Another sidelong glance. "A letter?" "Yes, she doesn't use email or phones much, says they attract attention." The man's expression darkened. "Your grandmother always was superstitious, but sometimes superstitions exist for a reason." He slowed the truck as they approached an unmarked dirt road leading into the woods. "This is as far as I go. Your grandmother's place is down this road, about half a mile." Hannah looked at the narrow lane disappearing into darkness. No street lights, no houses visible, just trees crowding close on either side. "I don't remember this road. It's a detour. The old way is closed." Hannah reached for the door handle. "Thank you for the ride." As she stepped out, the man leaned across the seat. "When you see your grandmother, tell her Walter Kine sends his respects." He hesitated. "And Hannah, don't stop walking, no matter what you hear, and don't look back until you're through her front door." Before she could ask what he meant, the truck pulled away, its taillights quickly swallowed by the darkness. Hannah stood at the edge of the dirt road, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't right. Orchard Way was paved. It had mailboxes and widely spaced farmhouses. This looked like a logging trail. But the alternative was walking back along Route 16 in the dark, potentially for miles. And Gran was waiting. Taking a deep breath, Hannah started down the dirt road. The night closed around her. Overhead, branches formed a tunnel that blocked out most of the starlight. The only sounds were her footsteps and the distant call of an owl. Then she heard something else, a soft rustling in the underbrush to her left. Animal, probably. A deer or raccoon. The rustling stopped when she did, resuming only when she continued walking. Not an animal. Then, Hannah quickened her pace, remembering Walter's strange warning. "Don't stop walking, don't look back." The rustling kept pace with her, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of movement from the corner of her eye, something pale, flitting between trees. Then the whisper started. "Hannah." So faint, she almost thought she'd imagined it. Hannah Mills, definitely her name. The voice sounded wrong, as if whoever whatever was speaking had learned human speech by imitation rather than natural development. "We've been waiting for you." Hannah broke into a run, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The dirt beneath her feet seemed to shift and give way oddly, as if she were running on something soft rather than packed earth. Ahead, a light appeared, a single illuminated window in a dark shape that must be a house. Gran's house, though it looked different somehow. Smaller, older. The whispers multiplied, becoming a chorus of not quite human voices. "Lucille told us you were coming. She's been waiting so long. We've all been waiting." Hannah ran faster, her lungs burning. The light from the window seemed to pulse, growing brighter then dimmer, like a heartbeat. Something brushed against her back, fingers, or what felt like fingers, only too cold and too smooth. The front porch was just ahead now. Hannah could make out the familiar shape of the old rocking chair, the hanging plant that Gran always kept by the door. The fingers brushed her neck, her hair. "You look just like her," the voices whispered in unison. "Just like Lucille, when she first came to us." Hannah's foot hit the bottom porch step, and she nearly fell. The touch withdrew instantly. She scrambled up the steps and reached for the door handle. It turned easily under her grip. Only then, with her hand on the threshold, did Hannah allow herself to look back. The dirt road was gone. In its place was a path of disturbed earth, as if the ground itself had been freshly turned over. On either side stood not trees but tall, slender figures with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their skin was the color of mushrooms, their faces smooth and featureless, except for eyes that reflected the light from the window like tiny mirrors. They stood motionless, arrayed in a semicircle around the path she'd traveled, waiting. Hannah stumbled backward through the door and slammed it shut. "Gran," she called, her voice shaking. "Gran, are you here?" The interior of the house was dark, except for a single lamp in what should have been the living room. The furniture was all wrong, older, shabbier, arranged differently than Hannah remembered. "In here, dear." Her grandmother's voice came from the lit room. Hannah followed the sound, relief and confusion warring within her. "Gran, there's something outside, something not right." She stepped into the living room and froze. Lucille Mills sat in her favorite armchair, hands folded in her lap. She looked exactly as Hannah remembered. Silver hair, in a neat bun, blue cardigan, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Except her eyes. Her eyes were like those of the creatures outside, reflective, mirror-like. "You got my letter," Lucille said, smiling. "I'm so glad you came. It's been very lonely here." "Gran, what's happening? What were those things outside?" "The quiet folk," Lucille replied calmly. "They've always been here, long before us. They just don't often show themselves to outsiders. They spoke to me. They said you were waiting." "I was. Lucille gestured to a chair opposite her own. "Sit down, Hannah. We have so much to discuss." Hannah remained standing. "Your eyes," Lucille's smile faltered slightly. "A necessary adjustment. You'll understand soon." "Where are we?" "This isn't your house." "Not really. It is now." Lucille leaned forward. "Hannah, listen carefully. The world you knew, the one you came from, isn't accessible from here anymore. This place, it exists alongside that world, but separate. Think of it as a fold in reality." "I don't understand." "The quiet folk needed someone to liaison with the other side, to bring certain things back and forth. Years ago, when I first discovered this place, I agreed to help them. In exchange, they've given me knowledge, Hannah. Incredible knowledge. You've been here for years, but I just saw you last summer." Lucille shook her head sadly. "No, dear, you think you did, but that wasn't me. The quiet folk are excellent at creating approximations." Horror dawned slowly. "An approximation of you has been living in your house. For how long?" "Time works differently here. For me, it's been a very long time." Lucille's hand trembled slightly. "But I'm tired now, Hannah. The work takes a toll. I need someone to take my place, someone of my blood." Hannah backed toward the door. "No, whatever this is, whatever deal you made, I want no part of it. I'm afraid it's not that simple." Lucille's voice hardened. "The letter wasn't an invitation, Hannah. It was a summoning." A soft rustling sound came from behind. Hannah turned to see the doorway, filled with the pale, elongated figures of the quiet folk. "Don't be afraid," Lucille said. "The adjustment period is brief, and afterward, you'll understand things you never imagined possible." "Walter," Hannah said suddenly. "Walter Kine. He sent his respects." Lucille's mirror eyes widened. "Walter, he's still alive. He drove me part of the way here." Something like grief passed across Lucille's face. "Walter tried to warn me. All those years ago, I should have listened." She stood abruptly. "Go, now, before they realize what I'm doing." "Gran, they can't hold you here, unless you agree, Hannah." "Not fully. That's why they needed me, why they need any of us. Free will matters, even to them." Lucille pushed past the quiet folk, pulling Hannah toward what should have been the kitchen, but was now just a dark void. "There's a way back, but we must hurry." The quiet folk began to move, their bodies flowing like liquid rather than walking. Their whispers filled the air. "Lucille, remember our arrangement. She stays. You promised." Lucille ignored them, pulling Hannah through the darkness, until they reached what felt like another door. "When you go through, don't stop running, until you reach the main road. Flag down the first car you see. Lucille pressed something into Hannah's hand, a small smooth stone with strange markings. Keep this with you always. It will prevent them from finding you again. Come with me, Hannah pleaded. Lucille shook her head, her mirror eyes reflecting Hannah's terrified face. I can't. I'm not complete enough anymore to exist there. But you can. She pushed Hannah toward the door. Go. Live. The last thing Hannah saw, as the door closed between them, was the quiet folk surrounding her grandmother, their pale limbs enveloping her like a cocoon. Then she was running through darkness, the ground beneath her feet gradually solidifying from the strange, giving softness to packed dirt, then gravel, then finally asphalt. Route 16 stretched before her, illuminated by the headlights of an approaching car. Hannah stood in the middle of the road, waving frantically. The car, an old station wagon, screeched to a halt. Are you okay? The driver asked, rolling down his window. A middle-aged woman peered out with concern. I need to get to town, Hannah gasped. Please, hop in, the woman said. You look like you've seen a ghost. As Hannah climbed into the passenger seat, the woman asked, where were you coming from? There's nothing out this way for miles. Hannah looked back, at the empty road stretching into darkness. My grandmother's house, she said, but I don't think I'll be visiting again. In her palm, the strange stone pulsed with faint warmth, its markings momentarily glowing, before fading back to darkness. 3 months later, Hannah received a letter, no return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words, they're still watching. Beneath the letter in the envelope was a newspaper clipping from the small town near her grandmother's home. The headline read, Local man found dead under mysterious circumstances. The article detailed how Walter Kine, 67, had been discovered in his truck on a remote stretch of Route 16. The cause of death was undetermined, but the reporter noted one unusual detail. Mirrors had been placed over the man's eyes. That night, Hannah dreamed of a dirt road and pale figures moving between trees. When she woke, she found muddy footprints leading to her bed, and on her nightstand, where she'd left the marked stone, there was only an empty space and a small pile of fresh soil.
The footprints disappeared by morning, but Hannah knew they had been real. She swept up the soil and flushed it down the toilet, watching the dark particles swirl away. The marked stone, her only protection, was gone. For a week, Hannah barely slept. She installed new locks on her apartment door and blackout curtains on all the windows. She bought night lights for every room and kept them burning constantly. At work, she found herself drifting, startling at shadows and reflective surfaces. You look terrible, her co-worker Mia said over coffee. Are you coming down with something? Hannah considered telling her the truth, then imagined how it would sound. My grandmother lives in a fold of reality, with creatures that aren't human. They're looking for me now. Just insomnia, she said. Instead, that night, Hannah dreamed again of the dirt road. This time, she saw Gran standing at the end of it, her mirror eyes glinting in darkness. They're coming, Dream Gran said. You need to prepare. Hannah woke gasping, the bedsheets damp with sweat. Her phone showed 3:17 a.m., the dead hour, when the veil between worlds was said to be thinnest. A soft scraping sound came from the living room. Hannah's heart thundered in her chest. She reached for the baseball bat she'd started keeping beside her bed, then froze as her bedroom door slowly opened. It wasn't the quiet folk, it was worse. Gran stood in the doorway, not the mirror-eyed version from the fold, but the perfect approximation that had lived in her house for years. The one Hannah had believed was her grandmother during all those summer visits. Hello dear, not Gran said, her voice a perfect imitation of Lucille's warm tones. I've missed you. Hannah scrambled back against the headboard. You're not my grandmother. No, not, Gran agreed pleasantly, but I've carried her memories for so long that the distinction hardly matters anymore. What do you want? To deliver a message.
Not. Gran moved into the room with unnatural smoothness. Lucille is gone. She served her purpose, and now she's been reabsorbed. Hannah felt sick. You killed her. We don't think of it that way. Nothing is ever truly lost in the fold. Parts of her consciousness remain, distributed among us, and now you want me to take her place. Not. Gran smiled. You're direct, like her. But no, that opportunity has passed. You refuse the calling, and the door closes only once. Relief flooded through Hannah, immediately followed by suspicion. Then why are you here? Because while you can't join us, you've been marked. You've walked the path between worlds. You've seen the fold. Not. Gran's eyes suddenly reflected the dim light from the hallway, becoming mirror-like. And now you can help us in a different way. Hannah gripped the bat tighter. I won't help you. You already are. Not. Gran gestured around the room. Your fear feeds the boundary between worlds, strengthens the fold. Every time you start at a shadow or search for pale faces in the crowd, you're helping us maintain our foothold. Then I'll stop being afraid. Not. Gran laughed. A horrible sound that started as Lucille's gentle chuckle, and descended into something inhuman. Fear isn't something you can simply switch off, dear, especially when the danger is real. She reached into her cardigan pocket, and withdrew a familiar object, the marked stone, that had disappeared from Hannah's nightstand. Lucille thought this would protect you. She was always sentimental that way. Not. Gran placed the stone on Hannah's dresser. But protection isn't what you need. Understanding is. Understanding of what? Of why we're here. What we want. Not. Gran moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, the street was unnaturally dark. Streetlights extinguished. In their place, stood a dozen or more of the quiet folk, their pale forms visible even in the darkness. We've always been here, Hannah. In the spaces between, in the shadows humans dismiss, and the sounds they ignore. We aren't invaders, we're the original inhabitants. Hannah found her voice. What do you want from me? To remember, to watch, to tell others, though they won't believe you. Not. Gran turned back from the window. You're our witness now, and if I refuse, you can't. The moment you stepped onto that dirt road, you became part of the Fold's story. The only choice you have is whether to embrace that role or fight it. Not. Gran moved toward the door. Fighting will only make it worse. Ask Walter Kine. Hannah thought of the newspaper clipping, the mirrors over Walter's eyes. You killed him. He interfered, helped you escape when you were meant to stay. Not. Gran paused at the doorway. We don't wish you harm, Hannah. Quite the opposite. We need human awareness to maintain our existence. Fear keeps us alive, but understanding gives us form. What happens now? Now you live your life, knowing what you know, seeing what others don't see. Not. Gran's form seemed to shimmer slightly, becoming less solid, and occasionally will ask small favors. I won't help you hurt people. We rarely want that. Usually we just need someone to open doors, to create pathways, to leave windows unlatched. Not. Gran smiled one last time. Sleep well, Hannah. We'll be watching. She stepped backward through the doorway, and was gone. In her place, stood emptiness, so profound it seemed to drink in the light. Hannah sat motionless for long minutes, waiting for something else to happen. When nothing did, she slowly rose and moved to the dresser, where Not Gran had placed the marked stone. It looked ordinary now, just a smooth river rock with faded scratches. Whatever power it once held seemed dormant. Hannah picked it up anyway, clutching it like a talisman, as she approached the window. Outside, the streetlights had returned, illuminating an empty road. No pale figures, no watching eyes, but she knew they were there, just beyond what she could see, waiting. 3 days later, Hannah found herself driving west on Interstate 80, the marked stone sitting on the passenger seat beside her. She'd quit her job, sublet her apartment, and withdrawn her savings. Running wasn't a solution. She understood that now. but staying put felt like surrender. As miles disappeared beneath her tires, Hannah considered not Gran's words. Understanding gives us form. What did that mean? That human comprehension somehow made the quiet folk more real, or that their existence depended on human awareness? Near the Ohio border, Hannah pulled into a roadside diner. As she waited for her coffee, she noticed an elderly woman watching her from a booth across the room. There was something familiar about her, something in the way she held herself. The woman raised her coffee cup in a small salute, and for just a moment, her eyes caught the light strangely. Hannah looked away quickly, her heart racing. When she looked back, the woman was gone, leaving behind an empty cup and a folded napkin. Curious despite her fear, Hannah crossed to the booth and picked up the napkin. Written in familiar handwriting were 2 words, "Keep moving." That night, in a cheap motel room, with the television droning in the background, Hannah began to write. She recorded everything: her walk down the dirt road, the quiet folk, Gran's mirror eyes, not Gran's visit. She wrote until her hand cramped and dawn began to seep through the curtains. When she finished, Hannah stared at the pages spread across the bed. Not a story, but a record, a warning, a truth that no one would believe. She gathered the pages and placed them in a manila envelope, along with the marked stone. On the outside, she wrote an address, that of a literary magazine that specialized in horror fiction. They would think it was a story submission. They would publish it as fiction, but somewhere, someone would recognize the truth. Someone else who had glimpsed the fold, who had seen the quiet folk moving in the spaces between. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding would be enough to keep the boundaries strong. As Hannah sealed the envelope, she felt a strange sense of peace. The fear wasn't gone. It would never be gone, but it no longer controlled her. She was a witness now, but also a messenger. Outside her motel room, a truck pulled up, old, faded red. The driver rolled down the window, revealing a face Hannah recognized instantly. Walter Kinn smiled at her with mirror eyes. "Need a ride?" he asked. Hannah hesitated, then picked up her bag and the manila envelope. She had a choice to make. She could run forever, alone and afraid, or she could step into the fold willingly, eyes open, and learn its secrets from the inside. After all, Gran had managed to send her back once. Perhaps there was more to the story than even the quiet folk knew. Hannah opened the motel room door and stepped outside, into the early morning light. The choice she made would determine not just her future, but the strength of the boundary between worlds. Behind her, the television flickered to static, and for just a moment, a pale face appeared on the screen, watching, waiting to see what she would do.
Dr. Eleanor Wynne had spent her entire career studying memory, how it forms, how it distorts, how it sometimes disappears entirely. But nothing in her 20 years of research had prepared her for what happened on the 7th floor of Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. It began with a single patient, Michael Farrow, 32, admitted after being found wandering Highway 16 in the middle of the night, soaked to the bone despite the absence of rain. Michael claimed to have no memory of who he was, or how he got there. Standard amnesia protocol was initiated, but preliminary scans showed something unusual. His hippocampus was fully intact, showing none of the damage typically associated with memory loss. That's when Dr. Wynne was called in. "He's been completely cooperative," Dr. Liam Chen, the attending psychiatrist, told her as they walked the sterile hallway toward Michael's room. "No violent tendencies, no apparent delusions. He simply has no autobiographical memory whatsoever." "Retrograde or anterograde?" Eleanor asked, flipping through Michael's thin file. "Both. Oddly enough, he can't form new episodic memories either. Every morning, it's like hitting reset." Eleanor frowned. "That's unusual." "That's not even the strangest part," Dr. Chen said, stopping outside room 712. "Watch this." He opened the door. Inside, Michael Farrow sat on the bed, staring out the window at the gray October sky. A man of average height and build, with dark hair and eyes that seemed somehow too old for his face. "Good morning, Michael," Dr. Chen said cheerfully. "I've brought someone to meet you." Michael turned, his expression pleasant, but vacant. "Good morning, Dr. Chen. Nice to meet you." Dr. Chen's smile faltered slightly. "Michael, we've met every day for the past 3 weeks, have we?" Michael seemed genuinely surprised. "I'm sorry, I don't remember." "That's quite all right," Eleanor interjected, stepping forward. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Wynne. I specialize in memory disorders." Michael's eyes fixed on her, and for a moment something flickered across his face, recognition perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Nice to meet you, Dr. Wynne. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's okay." Michael nodded amiably. "Of course." Eleanor pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "Can you tell me the last thing you remember before waking up here?" Michael's brow furrowed in concentration. "Water," he said finally. "I remember water, and something beneath it. Waiting. Waiting for what?" "For someone to see it." Eleanor made a note. "And what happens when someone sees it?" Michael's eyes met hers, suddenly clear and focused. "They become a door." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "A door to what?" "I don't know," Michael said, his voice small. "But they're using me to find out." Before Eleanor could ask who they were, Michael's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed onto the bed, his body rigid. "Seizure," Dr. Chen said, rushing forward. "This happened yesterday too, right after our session." As they stabilized Michael, Eleanor noticed something odd, a small puddle of water forming beneath the bed, despite there being no apparent source. The next day, Eleanor returned to find Michael exactly as before, pleasant, vacant, with no memory of their previous meeting, but this time, she came prepared. "I'd like to try something different today," she said, placing a digital recorder on the table between them. "I'm going to play you something, and I want you to tell me if it sounds familiar." She pressed play, and Michael's voice filled the room. "Water. I remember water, and something beneath it. Waiting." Michael's face remained blank. "For someone to see it." "Nothing. They become a door." At these words, Michael's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Turn it off," he whispered. Eleanor pressed stop. "You recognize that?" "I didn't say those things," Michael insisted, though his voice trembled. "That's not me. It was recorded yesterday during our session." Michael shook his head violently. No, that's not how it works. I don't remember. I'm not supposed to remember." "Who says you're not supposed to remember, Michael?" "The one below," he whispered, and then clutched his head in apparent pain. "It's coming. Please, you need to leave." "What's coming?" "The water," Michael gasped. "It always comes after, to clean away the memory." As if on cue, the sprinklers in the ceiling activated, spraying the room with water. The fire alarm blared throughout the building. Eleanor grabbed her notes and recorder, backing toward the door. "Michael, come with me. We need to evacuate." But Michael remained seated, eerily calm now as water soaked through his clothes. "It's too late," he said, his voice suddenly different, deeper, resonant. "I've seen you now, Dr. Wynne, and so has it." The overhead lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, Eleanor could have sworn Michael's eyes reflected like mirrors. The fire department found no explanation for the sprinkler malfunction, which had been isolated to room 712. Michael was transferred to a new room, and Eleanor spent the next week reviewing his case, searching for any clue to his condition. She found nothing in his medical history, no record of trauma or prior psychiatric issues. In fact, she found almost nothing about Michael Farrow at all. No birth certificate, no driver's license, no social media presence. It was as if he hadn't existed until he was found on Highway 16. On day 8, Eleanor decided to try hypnosis. To her surprise, Michael proved to be an excellent subject, slipping easily into a trance state. "Michael, I want you to go back to before you came to the hospital. Where were you?" "The lake," he murmured. "Blackwood Lake." Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition.
Blackwood Lake was less than 5 miles from the hospital, a man-made reservoir, created in the 1950s, when the valley was flooded for a hydroelectric project. What were you doing there? Searching. For what? The old town, the one they drowned. Eleanor knew the story. The town of Old Blackwood had been evacuated and submerged when the dam was built. Local legend held that some residents had refused to leave, choosing to go down with their homes. Did you find it? Yes, Michael whispered. But it wasn't empty. What do you mean? The church. I found the church first. The door was open, so I swam inside. Michael's breathing became labored. There were people inside, sitting in the pews, waiting for what, Michael? For someone to see them, to remember them. His voice dropped to a whisper, but they weren't people anymore. Not really. Eleanor leaned forward. What were they? Vessels, empty vessels, all except for the priest. He was full of what? Michael's eyes snapped open, but they weren't his eyes anymore. They were milky white, like those of a blind man, full of the one below, he said. But it wasn't Michael's voice. It was older, with a strange accent Eleanor couldn't place. The one that was worshipped before your Christ, before your churches, before your town. Eleanor fought to keep her voice steady. And what does this one below want? A smile spread across Michael's face too wide, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous. To be remembered, to be seen, to be invited. Invited where? Here. Not, Michael said, gesturing around the room. Through the door. What door? The one you're becoming, Dr. Wynne. Eleanor felt a cold sensation spreading through her body, as if ice water was replacing her blood. I don't understand. You've heard its name now. You've thought about it, wondered about it. That's how it starts, with curiosity. Then comes the dreams. As if triggered by these words, Eleanor suddenly remembered her dream from the night before, of standing at the edge of a dark lake, seeing lights glimmering beneath the surface. In the dream, she had leaned forward, trying to see better, and something had reached up. You're already dreaming about it. Not, Michael said, reading her expression. Good. That makes you a suitable door. Eleanor stood abruptly. I think that's enough for today. She turned to leave, but not Michael's next words froze her in place. Your daughter would have been a better door. Pity about the accident. Eleanor whirled around. What did you say? But Michael's eyes had returned to normal, confusion evident on his face. Dr. Wynne, what's happening? Did I fall asleep? Eleanor stared at him, her heart pounding. She had never mentioned her daughter to anyone at Blackwood Hospital, not the car accident 5 years ago, not the long months of grief that followed, not the reason she had ultimately chosen to focus her research on memory disorders. How could he possibly know? That night, Eleanor dreamed of Blackwood Lake again. In the dream, she stood at the shore, watching as the water receded, revealing the spire of a church emerging from the depths. As the water continued to drain away, she could see more of the town. Houses, storefronts, a town square, with a gazebo, and people standing exactly where they had been when the water came, now covered in lake weed and silt, their eyes gleaming like mirrors in the moonlight. At the center of it all was the church, its doors wide open. From inside came a soft pulsing light, and the sound of singing, not hymns, but something older, a chant in a language Eleanor didn't recognize. She found herself walking toward it, drawn by the melody. As she approached the church steps, the singing stopped, replaced by a single voice. Mom. Eleanor froze. Standing in the church doorway was a figure she recognized immediately, her daughter Lucy, exactly as she had been at 12 years old, the age when she died. Lucy, Eleanor whispered, her dream self moving forward. Don't come in, Mom, Lucy said, her voice trembling. It's using me to get to you. It knows what you want most. What do you mean, Lucy? Is it really you? Parts of me, Lucy said. It collects pieces, memories, enough to make a lure. She glanced fearfully over her shoulder. You have to wake up now, Mom, before you see it. See what? Lucy's eyes filled with tears. The one below. It's almost through. The ground beneath Eleanor's feet began to tremble. Behind Lucy, The light inside the church grew brighter, more intense. "Wake up," Lucy screamed. "They're in the hospital. They've been there all along." Eleanor woke with a gasp, her sheets soaked with sweat. For a moment, she thought it was just the lingering effect of the nightmare, but then she realized her sheets weren't wet with sweat, they were wet with lake water. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Blackwood Hospital, earlier than usual. Instead of going directly to Michael's room, she headed to the records department in the basement. "I need to see the original blueprints for the hospital," she told the elderly clerk. "Research project?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Something like that." The clerk disappeared into the stacks, returning several minutes later with a large tube. "These are the originals from 1952, when they first built the place. Been digitized, but we keep these for historical purposes." Eleanor unrolled the blueprints on a nearby table, her eyes scanning the schematics. The hospital had been built shortly after the valley was flooded. She knew that much. What she didn't know, what she now suspected, was why the original structure was different from the current one. According to the blueprints, the hospital had been built with 8 floors, not 7. "What happened to the 8th floor?" she asked the clerk. He shrugged. "Far as I know, it's always been 7 floors." Eleanor pointed to the blueprints. "But this clearly shows 8. The clerk leaned in, frowning. "Huh, never noticed that before. Maybe they changed the plans during construction." But Eleanor was already looking at something else. The original purpose of the 7th floor. According to the blueprints, it had been designated as Special Containment Unit. "Do you know what this was for?" she asked. The clerk scratched his head. "Before my time, but my grandfather worked here back then. He used to say the 7th floor was where they kept the lake people." Lake people, folks who were found wandering around the lake after it was filled, acting strange, no memories, talking nonsense about a church under the water. He shrugged. "Local legend says they were the ghosts of the people who drowned when they flooded the valley." Eleanor felt a chill. "And where did these patients go?" "Don't know. Floor was converted to regular psychiatric care sometime in the 70s. He paused. "Funny thing though, Gramps used to say there were always exactly 12 of them, never more, never less. When one died, another would be found by the lake within a day." 12 apostles, Eleanor thought, remembering the church in her dream. "Thank you," she said, rolling up the blueprints. "One more question. Was there ever a Dr. Michael Farrow who worked here?" The clerk's eyes widened slightly. "Yeah, actually. Head of psychiatry back in the 60s. Disappeared one night. They found his car by the lake, but never found him." He tilted his head. "How'd you know about him?" Eleanor didn't answer. She was already heading for the elevator, her mind racing. When she reached the 7th floor, she went straight to Dr. Chen's office. "I need to know exactly where Michael Farrow was found," she said without preamble. Dr. Chen looked up from his computer, startled. "Good morning to you too, Eleanor. This is important, Lean. Where exactly on Highway 16 was he found?" "At the bridge," Chen said, pulling up the file. "The one that crosses the northern tip of Blackwood Lake, just as she'd suspected." "And who found him?" "Anonymous call to emergency services. By the time the ambulance arrived, there was just Michael, standing in the middle of the road, soaking wet." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I need to see the security footage from his room, from the night before the sprinklers went off." Chen frowned. "Why?" "Because I don't think Michael Farrow is who, or what, we think he is." The security footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed Michael's room at night, the patient apparently asleep in his bed. At precisely 3:17 a.m., he sat up, though his eyes remained closed. Then he began to speak. There was no audio on the recording, but Eleanor could see his lips moving, engaged in what appeared to be a one-sided conversation. After several minutes, he stood and walked to the wall opposite his bed. "Can you enhance this part?" Eleanor asked. Chen zoomed in. Michael was tracing something on the wall with his finger, symbols of some kind, arranged in a circular pattern. "What is that?" Chen murmured. "A door," Eleanor whispered. "On the screen." Michael stepped back from his handiwork, then placed his palm flat against the center of the circle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then water began to seep from the wall, running down in rivulets, pooling on the floor. "That's impossible," Chen said. "There are no water pipes in that wall." But Eleanor was watching Michael now. He had stepped back, his posture changing, becoming more rigid, and then, the moment that confirmed her suspicions, he turned toward the camera. His eyes reflected the light like mirrors. "That's not Michael," Eleanor said. "At least, not anymore." Eleanor insisted on moving Michael to a secure room, with constant observation. Chen agreed, though he clearly thought she was overreacting. "I've requested his DNA results be expedited," Eleanor told him. "I have a theory about who, or what, he really is. Care to share?" Eleanor hesitated. It sounded insane, even to her. "I think he's possessed, for lack of a better word, by something that lived in old Blackwood before the flood." Chen's expression remained carefully neutral. "And what makes you think that?" "The mirror eyes, the water, the symbols on the wall. I've been researching them. They appear in pre-colonial religious artifacts found in this region."
They're associated with a water deity, the indigenous people called the Dweller in the Deep. According to the legends, it could possess people who came into contact with its waters, using them as vessels to expand its influence. Chen leaned back in his chair, his expression caught between concern and skepticism. "Eleanor, you know how this sounds." "I know exactly how it sounds," she acknowledged, "but the evidence is mounting. The amnesia with no physiological cause, the water appearing from nowhere, the security footage, and now this." She placed a folder on his desk. The DNA results came back early. Chen opened the file, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the report. "This can't be right. I had them run it twice," Eleanor said. "The cellular structure is not entirely human, and it's changing. Changing into what? I don't know, but I think whatever's happening to Michael has happened before, to the lake peoples they used to keep on this floor in the 1950s. Before Chen could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. "It's the nurse's station. Something's happening with Michael." When they arrived at the observation room, they found 3 nurses and a security guard standing outside, their faces pale. "What's going on?" Chen demanded. "He's talking to someone," one of the nurses said, "but there's no one else in there." Through the observation window, Eleanor could see Michael sitting cross-legged on the floor. His lips were moving rapidly, his eyes fixed on a point in the empty space before him. "Turn on the audio," Eleanor instructed. When they did, Michael's voice filled the room, but he wasn't speaking English. The language was fluid, full of glottal stops, and strange intonations. "What is that?" Chen whispered. "I don't know," Eleanor replied. "But listen to how specific it is. Consistent phonetics, grammar patterns. This isn't gibberish. He's speaking an actual language." As they watched, Michael stopped mid-sentence, his head snapping toward the observation window. For a moment he stared directly at them. No, through them, as if seeing something beyond. Then he smiled. "Dr. Wynne," he said in English, his voice clear over the speaker. "You've been dreaming about us, haven't you? About the church beneath the lake." Eleanor felt her blood turn to ice. She hadn't told anyone about her dreams. "The door is almost ready," Michael continued. "The one below is eager to meet you. After all, you've been studying its children for years." "What is he talking about?" Chen asked. Eleanor's mind raced. "My research, memory disorders." A terrible suspicion began to form. "Liam, how many patients with unexplained amnesia have been admitted to this hospital over the years?" "Dozens at least." "It's not uncommon in." "How many were found near the lake?" Chen fell silent. Michael laughed, the sound echoing through the speakers. "She's beginning to understand, doctor." "How does it feel, Eleanor, to realize you've been treating its vessels all this time? Every amnesiac patient, every memory disorder with no clear cause, all preparations, all doors, waiting to be opened." "Turn off the audio," Eleanor said, her voice shaking, "and lock down this room. No one goes in."
No one comes out. Eleanor, what? Just do it, she snapped. And then I need access to all the patient files with memory disorders for the past 20 years, every single one. The files told a disturbing story. Over the past 2 decades, Blackwood Hospital had admitted 73 patients with unexplained amnesia or memory disorders. Of those, 61 had been found within a 5-mile radius of Blackwood Lake, and of those 61, 12 were still in the hospital, all on the 7th floor. It can't be a coincidence, Eleanor told Chen as they reviewed the files in his office. There's a pattern here. Look at the admission dates. She laid out a timeline. The admissions followed a clear cycle. Approximately every 18 months, a new patient would be found near the lake, with no memory and no identification. And look at the discharge dates, she continued. Always exactly 12 patients. When one leaves, another arrives within days. Chen finished, his skepticism finally cracking. Always maintaining the number 12. 12 apostles, Eleanor murmured. 12 doors. Doors to what? Eleanor met his gaze. To whatever is waiting in the submerged church. The one below. Michael called it. I think it's been planning this for decades, using this hospital as a staging ground. For what? I don't know. But Michael, or whatever is using him, said I was becoming a door too. She shuddered. And it mentioned my daughter. Things it couldn't possibly know. Chen was silent for a long moment. What do we do? First we need to verify something, Eleanor said, standing. I need to see all 12 patients. Now. They went from room to room on the 7th floor, checking each patient with memory disorders. To Eleanor's growing horror, her suspicion was confirmed. All of them showed the same subtle signs. The strange reflectiveness in their eyes, when the light hit them just right. The inexplicable dampness in their rooms. And when Dr. Chen reviewed their files, a common factor emerged. All had been found near water. It's like a colony, Eleanor whispered as they left the last room. A network of vessels, all connected to whatever is in the lake. But why now? Chen asked. Why is Michael acting differently from the others? Eleanor thought about the blueprint, the missing 8th floor. Because something's changed. The cycle is accelerating. She checked her watch. It's almost sunset. I need to see Michael again. Are you sure that's wise? No, Eleanor admitted. But I think he wants me for a reason. And I need to find out what that is before it's too late. Michael was exactly as they had left him, sitting cross-legged on the floor. But now the floor around him was wet. A perfect circle of water expanding outward. He hasn't moved for hours, the nurse reported, and we can't figure out where the water is coming from. Eleanor took a deep breath. I'm going in. Chen caught her arm. Eleanor, this is insane. We should evacuate the floor. Call in specialists. There's no time, she said. Whatever is happening, it's happening now. And I'm already connected to it. Through my dreams, through my research, maybe through my grief. She met his gaze steadily. I need to understand what it wants. After a moment, Chen nodded. 5 minutes. Then I'm pulling you out, whether you like it or not. Eleanor entered the room alone, the door locking behind her. The air felt thick, humid, carrying the scent of lake water, and something older like decay and ancient stone. Michael, she said softly. He looked up, his eyes now completely silver, like liquid mercury. Not quite, he replied, his voice resonating strangely in the small space. Michael is here, but he is elsewhere. I am speaking through what remains. And who are you? The one below has many names. Your kind once called it Dagon, or Hydros, or the drowned god. Names are irrelevant. It simply is. What does it want? What all forgotten gods want? To be remembered, to be worshipped again. The thing wearing Michael's face smiled. To return. And the doors, the 12 patients, vessels, connections. The one below cannot cross into your world directly. The rules are prohibitive, but through enough doors, open simultaneously. It shrugged Michael's shoulders. A way can be made. Eleanor felt a chill. That's what this has all been about. The hospital, the 7th floor. A temple, built unwittingly by your kind, directly above where the old church stood before the valley was flooded. The resonance is perfect. It gestured at the walls, stone and concrete, wire and plastic. These mean nothing. The water always finds a way through. And what happens when your God returns? The thing in Michael smiled wider. Change. Those who worship will be transformed, elevated. Those who resist will be used. All will serve one way or another. And my daughter, why did you mention her? Michael's expression softened into something almost like compassion. Because she sees you, Eleanor, from the other side. The one below holds dominion over all waters, including the river of death. Those who have passed beyond can be reached, returned, even for a price. Eleanor's heart pounded. What price? The same as always. Worship, service, and a willing door. You're offering to bring my daughter back. The one below offers nothing. It states terms. The choice is yours. Eleanor stared at the creature before her, thinking of her dreams, of Lucy standing in the church doorway, warning her. Was that really her daughter trying to protect her? Or just another lure, another manipulation? I need to think, she said. Time grows short, not Michael warned. The alignment approaches. Tonight, when the moon touches the lake, the doors will open, all of them, with or without your consent. Outside the room, Eleanor found Chen waiting anxiously. Well, he demanded. We need to evacuate the hospital, she said. Now, every patient, every staff member. On what grounds? I can't just then evacuate the 7th floor. Make up a reason, get sleek, structural damage, anything. But get everyone out before sunset. Chen studied her face. You believe it, don't you? Everything he told you. I don't know what I believe anymore, Eleanor admitted. But I'm not willing to risk lives to find out. After a moment, Chen nodded. I'll make the arrangements. What are you going to do? Eleanor looked back through the observation window at Michael, at the thing that was using Michael. I'm going to the lake, she said, to the source. Blackwood Lake was beautiful at dusk, the water reflecting the deepening purple of the sky. Eleanor stood at the shore, at the exact spot where her dreams always began. The evacuation was underway. Chen had called in a water damage emergency on the 7th floor, and patients were being temporarily relocated to other parts of the hospital. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best they could do on short notice. Eleanor checked her watch. 30 minutes until sunset. 30 minutes until whatever was going to happen, happened. She had come here looking for answers, but now that she stood before the dark waters, she wasn't sure what questions to ask. Was there really an ancient entity dwelling beneath the surface? Were her dreams messages from her dead daughter, or manipulations designed to lure her in? And if there was a chance, even the slightest chance, that Lucy could be returned to her? No, Eleanor said aloud, steeling herself against the temptation. That's not Lucy. It's using her memory against me. The surface of the lake remained placid, unresponsive, but as the sun dipped lower, Eleanor noticed something strange. The water near the center of the lake seemed to be receding, pulling away from the shore, gathering itself into a mound, and beneath it something was emerging. The top of a stone spire. The church from her dreams. Eleanor's phone rang, startling her. It was Chen. Eleanor, where are you? Something's happening. The patients, all of them, they're changing. What do you mean changing? Their eyes, their skin. It's like they're transforming into something else. And the water, it's everywhere now. Coming through the walls, the floor. We can't control it. Eleanor looked back at the lake. The church spire was fully visible now, and more of the structure was appearing as the waters continued to withdraw. The doors are opening, she whispered. What? Get everyone out, Liam. Not just the 7th floor, the entire hospital. Now, she ended the call, and took a step toward the water's edge. The church was almost completely exposed now. A Gothic structure of dark stone, its stained glass windows somehow intact after decades underwater, and the doors, massive wooden doors bound with iron, were opening. From inside came a soft, pulsing light. and the sound of singing. Eleanor felt herself drawn forward, just as in her dreams, but this time she was conscious, aware. She could choose. "Mom?" The voice froze her in place. Standing in the doorway of the church was Lucy, exactly as she had been at 12 years old. "Lucy?" Eleanor whispered, though she knew it couldn't really be her daughter. "Don't come any closer, Mom," Lucy said, her expression fearful. "It's not me, not all of me, just enough to draw you in." "I know," Eleanor said, forcing herself to remain where she was. "I know what it's trying to do." "Then why are you here?" A good question. Why had she come? To confront the entity? To negotiate? Or had some part of her been tempted by its offer? "I came to understand," Eleanor said finally. "And to end this." "How?" Lucy's form flickered slightly, like a bad television signal. "It's too powerful. It's been planning this for decades. The hospital, the patients, the hospital," Eleanor repeated, an idea forming. "Built directly above where this church stood. A perfect resonance," it said. She turned and looked back toward Blackwood Hospital, visible on the hill above the lake. The 7th floor was alight, with an eerie blue glow. "The doors," Eleanor murmured. "They're not just the patients. The entire 7th floor is a door. And if a door could be opened, it can be closed," she said aloud. Lucy's form flickered again. "Mom? Hurry, it's coming. I can feel it rising." The water at the base of the church began to bubble and churn. Something was emerging from beneath the foundations, something vast and dark. Eleanor pulled out her phone and called Chen. "Liam, listen carefully. I need you to destroy the 7th floor." "What?" "Eleanor, the sprinkler system," she interrupted. "Override it. Flood it completely. Not water fire. Start a fire on the 7th floor." "Have you lost your mind?" "Trust me, it's the only way to break the connection. The floor is a mirror of the church. If we destroy one, we sever the link." There was a long pause. "Then everyone's evacuated, except the 12 memory patients. They won't move, won't respond to anything." "Leave them," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. It was a terrible choice, but the alternative was worse. "I'm sorry, Liam, but if that thing comes through..." Another pause. "God help us," Chen said finally. "I'll do what I can." Eleanor ended the call and turned back to the church. The form of Lucy was gone, replaced by a tall figure in ecclesiastical robes, the priest from her dreams, his eyes glowing like silver coins. "You cannot stop what has already begun," he called, his voice carrying unnaturally across the water. The one below rises. The doors are open. Behind him, something massive shifted in the darkness of the church interior, something that seemed to absorb the light around it. Eleanor stood her ground. "Maybe I can't stop it," she shouted back, "but I can close the doors." In the distance an alarm began to wail. Smoke rose from the 7th floor of Blackwood Hospital. The priest's face contorted with rage. "What have you done?" The water around the church began to churn violently, waves crashing against the exposed stone. The massive shape behind the priest surged forward, a glimpse of something ancient and terrible, with too many limbs and eyes like abysses. Then flames erupted from the windows of the 7th floor, brilliant against the darkening sky. The effect was immediate. The church before Eleanor shuddered, its stone walls cracking. The priest screamed, not in pain, but in thwarted rage. The massive shape retreated, shrinking back into the depths of the church. "This is not the end," the priest snarled, his form beginning to dissolve like mist. "There will be other doors, other vessels. The one below is patient." "Maybe," Eleanor acknowledged, "but not today." The church was crumbling now, large chunks of stone falling into the churning water. The lake itself seemed to be reclaiming its territory, waves rushing in to cover the exposed structure. In moments, the church was gone, submerged once more beneath the dark waters of Blackwood Lake. The surface settled, becoming placid again, reflecting the first stars of evening. Eleanor stood at the shore for a long time, watching, thinking of the 12 patients, the unwitting vessels, thinking of Michael Farrer, whose fate would remain a mystery. thinking of her daughter, and whether any part of the vision had truly been Lucy.
As Eleanor approached Blackwood Hospital, the flames still licked at the windows of the 7th floor. Fire trucks lined the parking lot, their red and blue lights pulsing against the darkening sky. Medical staff rushed about, coordinating the evacuation, while bewildered patients huddled in designated safe areas. Chen spotted her and broke away from a group of firefighters. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes haunted. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse, "what happened at the lake?" "It's over," she replied, watching the flames. "At least for now. The church is gone, submerged again. The connection is broken, and the patients." She could hear the accusation in his voice, the weight of the decision she'd forced upon him. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "Did any of them?" "We got them out," Chen said. "All 12. But they're changed. I don't know how to explain it. They're alive, but unresponsive, like empty shells." A chill ran through Eleanor. The vessels without their occupant. Chen nodded toward a row of ambulances. "They're being transferred to County General. I don't know what will tell them. The truth," Eleanor said. "Or as much of it as they'll believe." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the firefighters battle the blaze. The 7th floor was nearly gutted now, a blackened skeleton of what it had been. "I'll lose my job for this," Chen said, matter-of-factly. "Probably," Eleanor agreed. "So will I." Was it worth it? Eleanor thought of the massive shape she'd glimpsed in the church doorway, of the priest's final warning. "I don't know," she admitted. "We didn't stop it, not permanently. We just delayed it." "How long?" "I don't know that either. But now we know what we're facing. That's something." A firefighter approached them, helmet in hand. "Dr. Chen, we've contained the fire to the 7th floor, but the water damage is extensive throughout the building. The hospital will need to be evacuated completely until structural engineers can assess the damage." Chen nodded. "Thank you. We'll coordinate with emergency services for patient relocation." After the firefighter left, Chen turned to Eleanor. "What now?" Eleanor looked up at the ruined 7th floor, then back toward the lake, just visible through the trees. "Now we watch," she said, "and we prepare, because it's still down there, waiting, the one below, and it's patient." "How do you fight a god?" Chen asked quietly. Eleanor thought of her daughter, of the brief glimpse she'd had of her, real or not, standing in the church doorway, warning her, protecting her, with knowledge, she said, with vigilance, and with the understanding that some doors should remain closed. She turned away from the burning hospital, her resolve hardening. The one below had used her grief, her research, her very life's work against her, had merely used her as a door for something ancient and terrible to enter the world. But doors could be locked, guarded, defended. "Come on," she said to Chen. "We have work to do." As they walked away from the hospital, Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace beneath her exhaustion. The dreams would stop now, she knew. But the battle, the true battle, was just beginning, and somewhere, in whatever realm lay beyond death, she hoped Lucy was watching, and proud. It was supposed to be a fresh start after her divorce. Emily wanted nothing more than peace. A quiet life for her and her 6-year-old son Jacob. The house on Blackthorn Hill was old but charming, nestled far away from the noise of the city. It was affordable, almost too affordable, but Emily didn't ask questions. She should have. The first night, it started with whispers, faint, unintelligible murmurs, drifted through the walls. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer, like someone was talking just out of earshot. Jacob began waking up crying, saying there was a woman in his room, who kept asking him questions. "Mommy, she wants to know where the key is," he whispered one night, his voice trembling. "There's no woman, honey," Emily assured him, though her own skin prickled with fear. The next day Emily found something odd. An old, rusted key inside Jacob's toy chest. She didn't know how it got there. That night, the whispers grew louder. One evening, Emily woke up at 3:03 a.m., the exact same time every night since they moved in. The sound of a music box echoed faintly through the halls. Following the sound, she found herself in the basement, a room she had never entered before. The air was freezing. At the far end of the room was an old wooden door, locked tight. Emily's heart pounded as she held up the rusted key. It fit perfectly. Behind the door was a small windowless room, empty except for a child's bed and a broken music box on the floor. The walls were covered in scratches, like someone had tried desperately to claw their way out. Emily fled upstairs, slamming the door shut. The next morning, Jacob was gone. The police found no sign of forced entry. His bed was undisturbed, but on the wall above his pillow, written in small shaky letters, were the words, "She found the key." Desperate, Emily returned to the basement. The door was open. Inside the room, the music box played softly. Jacob's voice called out from the darkness, "Mommy, please help me." But there was something else. Another voice, cold and distant, whispering right behind her ear, "He's mine now." And then the door slammed shut. Emily was never seen again. After their disappearance, strange things kept happening. Neighbors reported seeing a woman's shadow moving behind the curtains, even though the house remained empty. Children playing nearby claimed they heard someone whisper their names when they got too close. Once a group of teenagers dared each other to enter the basement. Only one came out. His hair turned stark white, and his eyes wide with terror. He never spoke of what he saw. But the house's story didn't start with Emily and Jacob. Decades earlier, the house belonged to the Blackthorn family, a wealthy but secretive couple with one daughter, Eleanor. Eleanor was said to be strange, obsessed with dolls and music boxes. She would disappear for days, only to return with no memory of where she had been. One day, she vanished for good. Her parents claimed she had run away, but rumors spread of a locked room in the basement, where they kept her when she misbehaved. After the Blackthorn family disappeared mysteriously, the house remained vacant for years, until it was sold cheaply again and again. Every family that lived there reported strange occurrences, whispers, cold spots, and the sound of a music box playing at night. Emily's sister Sarah refused to believe the official story. Desperate for answers, she started investigating the house's history and discovered records of missing children linked to the property over the past century. All of them disappeared without a trace. All of their families reported hearing whispers and finding strange keys. Determined to find her nephew and sister, Sarah broke into the house. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, she descended into the basement. The air grew colder with every step. The music box played louder. The wooden door stood open. Inside, the room was no longer empty. The bed was neatly made, and the music box turned slowly on the floor. As Sarah stepped closer, she saw a figure in the shadows, a small girl with long tangled hair. "Where's my key?" the girl asked in a soft, lilting voice. Before Sarah could answer, the door slammed shut behind her. The house on Blackthorn Hill remains empty, but sometimes, neighbors say they hear a woman screaming, and the soft, eerie sound of a music box playing at night. What do you think happened to Emily, Jacob, and Sarah? Who is the girl, and what does the key unlock? Leave your theories in the comments below. It started with the lights. Ashwood Creek was a quiet, forgotten town, nestled between endless miles of dense forest and winding roads. Life was simple. People knew each other's names, doors were left unlocked, and nothing ever happened. That changed on the night the lights appeared. It began as a soft, flickering glow in the woods. Pale, bluish-white orbs floated through the trees, moving in strange, synchronized patterns. Some people thought it was lightning bugs, others blamed swamp gas, but the lights kept coming, closer each night, until they reached the edge of town. Then the disappearances started. First, it was animals, dogs and cats vanishing without a trace. Then children began whispering about seeing strange figures at their windows, pale faces with hollow eyes, watching from the tree line. No one believed them until the night Mia Granger went missing. The whole town searched, but there was no sign of the 10-year-old girl. The only clue was her bike, lying at the edge of Ashwood Creek Forest, its wheels still spinning. That's when the dreams began. Nearly everyone in town started having the same nightmare, of a dark figure standing at the foot of their bed, whispering in a language no one could understand. The figure never moved, never touched them, but its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. Sheriff Dunham tried to keep the town calm, but when his own son disappeared, the fear turned to panic. Curfews were set. No one went near the forest, but the lights kept coming. One night, Emily Hayes, a local journalist, decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, she ventured into Ashwood Creek Forest. Hours passed with nothing but the sounds of rustling leaves and the occasional snap of a branch. Then she saw them. The lights danced around her, closer than ever. She raised her camera, but the air grew freezing cold. A low, whispering sound surrounded her, and the lights began forming shapes, human shapes. Faces emerged from the glow, their mouths moving soundlessly. The next morning, Emily's camera was found at the edge of the forest. The last image showed a pale face inches from the lens, its eyes completely black. Emily was never found. The town fell into chaos. More people vanished, sometimes leaving behind only faint blackened footprints leading into the woods. The lights grew brighter, more frequent. One night, the entire town woke to a sound, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. When the sun rose, Ashwood Creek was empty. Cars remained in driveways. Breakfast sat half-eaten on tables. Phones kept ringing with no one to answer. The only sign of life was the lights, drifting lazily through the empty streets. As investigators arrived from neighboring towns, they were baffled by the scene. Everything was perfectly preserved. No signs of struggle, no bodies, no clue. Only the overwhelming silence and the occasional flicker of those strange lights. The forest was searched, but nothing was found. No animals, no people, only an eerie stillness that made the air feel heavy. The deeper they went, the colder it became, until one search party stumbled upon something chilling, a massive clearing, where the trees had been burned in a perfect circle. In the center stood a single blackened tree with strange symbols carved into its bark. The air around it vibrated with a low hum. As the weeks passed, rumors spread. Survivors from neighboring towns claimed they saw figures moving at the edge of the woods, pale, thin shapes with hollow eyes, standing motionless. Watch. The lights began appearing in those towns too, creeping closer every night. Then the dreams spread. People in the neighboring towns began waking up with scratches on their arms and legs, as if they had been walking through brambles in their sleep. Some woke to find dirt in their beds, their feet muddy. Others swore they heard whispers just before falling asleep, soft, insistent voices, asking, "Do you see the lights?" The disappearances resumed. Now entire regions are gripped with fear. The lights move from town to town, and the figures in the woods grow bolder. No one knows where the people of Ashwood Creek went, but sometimes late at night, you can still hear their voices on the wind. What happened to the people of Ashwood Creek? Who were the figures in the forest? And what did the lights want? Leave your theories in the comments below. The story begins in 1923. In the quiet mining town of Black Hollow. The town is isolated, surrounded by dense forests and steep cliffs. The residents are hardworking but superstitious, often speaking of the old ones who lived in the valley long before the town was built. One night, a strange hum fills the air, low and resonant, like the sound of a distant bell. The next morning, the town is empty. Every single resident is gone. The only clue is the word "listen," carved into the walls of every building. The mystery becomes a local legend, but over time, Black Hollow is forgotten, swallowed by the forest. Decades later, a group of urban explorers, Maya, Jake, Elena, and Liam, stumble upon Black Hollow while documenting abandoned places. They are drawn to the town's eerie beauty and the mystery of its disappearance. Maya, The leader, a rational and skeptical journalist, who doesn't believe in the supernatural. Jake, a thrill seeker and cameraman, always looking for the next adrenaline rush. Elena, a historian with a fascination for local legends and folklore. Liam, a quiet, introverted engineer who's more interested in the town's architecture than its history. As they explore, they notice strange details. The walls seem to hum faintly when touched. Shadows move in the corners of their vision, but when they turn, there's nothing there. They find old photographs of the townspeople, but the faces are blurred or scratched out. The group sets up camp in the old church, the only building that still feels somewhat intact. That night, they hear the whispers for the first time. Maya hears her name, spoken in her mother's voice, a woman who died years ago. Jake hears laughter, faint, and mocking coming from the basement. Elena hears a child singing a lullaby in a language she doesn't recognize. Liam hears nothing but feels an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something is watching him. The next day they find a journal in the pastor's office. The entries describe the town's descent into madness. The whispers started after miners uncovered a strange black stone deep in the forest. The stone seemed to pulse, as if alive, and emitted a low hum. The pastor believed the stone was a gateway to something ancient and malevolent. In the town hall, the group finds a map of the valley with a red X, marking a location deep in the forest. Elena recognizes the symbol from local folklore. It's said to mark the resting place of the old ones, beings who lived in the valley long before humans. Against Maya's objections, the group decides to investigate. As they venture into the forest, the whispers grow louder, more insistent. They begin to experience hallucinations. Maya sees shadowy figures following them, always just out of reach. Jake starts hearing his own voice, taunting him with his deepest fears. Elena finds herself reliving a childhood memory she had long forgot. Liam becomes increasingly withdrawn, as if he's hiding something. The group reaches the red X, and discovers a massive, black stone buried in the earth. It's covered in strange symbols that seem to shift and change when looked at directly. The air around it feels heavy, oppressive. As they examine the stone, the whispers become a deafening roar. The ground begins to shake, and the forest seems to close in around them. Jake touches the stone, and is immediately overcome with visions of the town's final day. He sees the residents being dragged into the earth, their faces twisted in terror. Elena deciphers part of the symbols. They're a warning, a plea for anyone who finds the stone to leave and never return. Liam reveals that he's been hearing the whispers since they arrived in Black Hollow. They've been telling him to bring the others to the stone. Part 5, The Disappearance. The group tries to leave, but the forest seems to have shifted. They're lost, walking in circles. The whispers grow louder, more desperate. One by one, the explorers begin to disappear. Jake is the first to go. He's lured away by the sound of his own voice, calling for help. Elena follows a child's laughter into the trees and never returns. Liam sacrifices himself to the stone, believing it's the only way to stop the whispers. Only Maya remains. She finds herself back in the town, but it's no longer abandoned. The streets are filled with shadowy figures, their faces blurred. The whispers are everywhere, urging her to listen. Epilogue. The unanswered question. Maya wakes up in a hospital bed, miles from Black Hollow. She has no memory of how she got there. The doctors tell her she was found wandering in the forest, delirious and muttering about whispers. But as she looks at the hospital wall, she sees something carved into the plaster. Listen. The story ends with Maya sitting alone in her apartment, the whispers slowly returning. She picks up a pen and begins to write, as if compelled by an unseen force. Themes and psychological triggers, unfinished tasks. The explorers never fully uncover the truth about the stone or the whisper. Foreshadowing, the blurred faces in the photographs, the shifting symbols on the stone, and the pastor's journal all hint at a larger unspeakable horror. Human emotions, fear, guilt, and desperation drive the characters' actions, making the story relatable and unsettling. Questions for the audience. What do you think the stone really is? Who, or what, were the old ones? Why did the whispers target Liam specifically? What happened to the other explorers? Share your theories in the comments below, but remember, some mysteries are better left unsolved.